So the question this week was, should we defund the police or not? And we'll talk about it this week because it's directly connected to the parsha. The parsha opening words is Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecho v'chol she'orecha. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18. You shall set up judges and law enforcement officials for yourself in all your cities that the Lord your God is giving you for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. And the obvious question that's asked right away is, what does the words shoftim v'shotrim, judges and law enforcement, what is the difference? So Rashi explains, judges are the ones who hand down the verdict, and shotrim are the law enforcement, the ones who enforce that law and verdict which has been handed down. So that's the way the Torah tells us clearly. We have a mitzvah. One of the mitzvahs of the Chumash is we have to establish for ourselves a system, a normal system to live by, a civilized court system. What does that mean? It means that there's laws. There are people who are in charge of and appointed to hand down the law, and then they are not the ones who can enforce their own laws. There's a separate department called law enforcement. They're the ones who it's their job to enforce the law which the judges hand down. That's the opening words of this week's parsha. So now, in addition to this mitzvah, which we have to set up judges and law enforcement, there's also the idea of an army. Besides for the regular law enforcement, there's also the idea of the army, which is also mentioned in the Chumash, which is when you're going to go out to war against your enemies. And you're going to see horses and chariots, a nation much more numerous than you. You shall not be afraid of them. Your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt is with you. When you approach the battle, the Kohen should come near and speak to the people. And the Torah goes on to say how the Kohen should say, Shema Yisrael, listen up to Jewish people. Today you're approaching battle against your enemies, but don't worry, don't be fearful, don't be terrified, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight with you against your enemies and to save you. So already in the Chumash, we have the idea of the necessity for a courageous Jewish army, one which is not afraid of the enemy, who is confident that they will return victorious from battle. We have judges, we have law enforcement, the regular law enforcement, and then we have the army. And all of these people are there to provide a sense of security and normalcy and peace for the people and the ordinary citizens to live comfortably. Because if there is no army, if you have no defense against an enemy army, then they will come and conquer you, and you're going to have serious living condition problems. If you have no law enforcement, regular police force and law enforcement, likewise, you are not going to be able to live in normalcy. And finally, if you don't have judges to hand down the law, you will also not have a normal civilization. You're not going to be able to deal with all of these things properly. So the Torah gives us this as a foundation. Now, 1,500 years after this mitzvah was given, there was a great Jewish leader, a great Jewish Rebbe, someone who actually has the name Rebbe. And he is known as Rebbe. He's just known as Rebbe. He's not even known always by his full name. Similar, if you will, the Lubavitch Rebbe. There are many, many different Rebbes out there in the world today. But everyone knows when you say the Rebbe, they know who you're referring to. You don't have to say the Lubavitch Rebbe. They know who you're talking about. When you just say Rebbe, everyone knows you're talking about Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, the codifier of the Mishnah. He was one of the greatest Jewish leaders ever to live. And I'm going to share with you a story, a very interesting story, a fascinating story, that's going to provide us with some illumination into who the true guardians of the city are. So let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, it said about Rabbi Yehuda Nossi that from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the first Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, until the days of Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi, we don't find by anybody, there wasn't one, not even one, who possessed Torah and nobility together as one, in one person. Meaning, there wasn't any Jewish leader who held the highest political position in addition to being a leading or the leading Torah personality of his generation as well. Generally speaking, the spiritual and the political leaders were different people. It was a split job, and often their agendas conflicted one with the other. It was very rare that one person should hold both positions. Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi lived in a generation following the Bar Kokhba revolt and the harsh decrees which befell the Jewish people due to the failed Bar Kokhba revolt. And this caused a tremendous, for lack of a better word, decimation of the Jewish land. And it took time for the Jewish community to recover from this. It took time to rebuild the Jewish community and Jewish culture. By the time Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi, Rebbe as we call it, by the time he came around, so already the Jewish people and the Jewish community rebounded and was already once again large enough to have great Torah scholars. What was unique, very unique about Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi was that Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi had a very, very close personal friendship with the non-Jewish Roman government. The Talmud describes a fascinating relationship between a Rebbe and the Roman emperor, who we refer to as Antoninus, which we assume it's probably referring to Marcus Antoninus. This Roman emperor not only had a very close relationship with Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi, but he also had a very great appreciation for his spiritual position. And he admired the Jewish values. And this relationship between the head of the Sanhedrin and the ruler of Rome granted the Jewish people a very peaceful time. The position of the head of the Sanhedrin, which had weakened over the years, became stronger than ever. Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi's wisdom and his Torah knowledge surpassed his peers, and couple that with his remarkable political connection and political position, so it gave him a degree of influence that had never been seen before at the time. So from Moshe Rabbeinu all the way until Rebbe, talking about many, many years, many centuries, 1,500 years, there wasn't anyone like it. Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi was very wealthy, very, very wealthy person, extremely wealthy. But Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi himself never, ever, ever took personal pleasure from his own great wealth. He used his money to support the academies and the Torah scholars. As a matter of fact, when Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi passed away, when Rabbeinu HaKadosh passed away, he said that he lifted his hands and he said that none of my fingers, not even one of my fingers, derived pleasure from this world. Physical, personal pleasure from this world. He was a completely selfless person. His business was great. He had a very valuable persimmon fruit business, which produced persimmons that we were able to sell for perfumes and other medicinal purposes. And he had olives and grapes. He was a big exporter of flax and of fish. So he had a very, very great business. But his own fingers, he said, Master of the universe, you know that my 10 fingers were involved in Torah study, and even my little finger did not take pleasure from this world. So his peers viewed him with the respect that such a person deserves. You can only imagine if you knew somebody who was so wealthy and so politically connected, and they had all the time and influence that one can only dream of, and they used all of their time exclusively for Torah study and helping out other people. They didn't go on vacations. They didn't buy cars. It was all about serving the community and service for the community. And when you know somebody like this, it's automatic that you have a certain respect for them. You hold them in a certain high esteem. So Rebbe really, not because of anything that he did to people, just because of his way of life, he commanded a respect across the spectrum. All Jews, all scholars, all types, all stripes, all really appreciated Rebbe for who he was. And that's why perhaps Rebbe was the one to compile the Mishnah, because usually the way Torah was studied up until that point, it was all Torah shebichsav, the written Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses and the prophets and the scriptures. And then you had Torah sheba'al peh, the oral Torah. The oral Torah was given together with the written Torah. When Moses came down from Sinai, he came down with a written book that he wrote down, as well as he had an oral tradition that God told him how we are to study this book. There was an instruction manual that was given over orally. That was called the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. And it was for centuries forbidden for anyone to write down the oral Torah and put it on paper. This was a forbidden act. So what happened? Why did Rebbe change this? Because Rebbe, despite all the other considerations, he decided that a change had to happen, and he had to put the oral Torah in writing, for he foresaw that not only would the state of the Jewish people not improve, but it would actually worsen over the years. And he was simply afraid that over the course of however many years it would take, a few years or it would be a few decades, but certainly not more than that, the oral Torah would be isolated in many, many places. They would not be able to have anyone that had the knowledge. It would become too limited, and the Jewish people would suffer because of this in an immeasurable fashion. So Rebbe decided that the time had come to put the oral tradition, the oral Torah, down on paper, and he created what's called a system of the Mishnayos. That's the first book of oral Torah written down. All of the laws that had been studied for 15 years, the back and forth and the debates over 15 years, were put into the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6th section of the Mishnayos. Why? And as I said before, only someone like him who had the respect of all of his peers was able to do such a thing. They all accepted it from him because of who he was. So this was an exceptional historic figure. And someone who, what would Judaism be today without the oral tradition being written? Take away the Talmud, take away the Mishnah and anything we have, we wouldn't be anywhere. We would no way be able to survive the last 2,000 years in the exile without having also. This was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's foresight, and all really a branch of his piety. That's really where it came from. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a very, very special Jewish figure. Now, here's the story relating to should we defund the police, and it's a very serious story, and something which is very insightful for us. The story goes like this: the Midrash relates that during the period of the Roman exile, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi sent 2 of his students, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. Now, these 2 students are very famous in the Gemara and the Talmud. You'll see their name mentioned many, many times. What did he do? He sent them on a mission. You know, today there's Jewish communities, mission to Israel, mission to Ukraine, mission to wherever there's a disaster, right? Why do you have to go there? Nobody knows. It's a waste, whatever. It's for public relations purposes, to show that you can hand out a pillow to someone who just had a fire and a hurricane and whatever it is. Some of them are very important, and some of them are not, unfortunately. So Rebbe sent his 2 very special and close students, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, on a mission. The mission was to go visit the Jewish communities and to study their state and find out their needs. A true Jewish leader. He was sitting before the days of email and before the days of technology. He wanted to find out from people on the ground what's going on. The only way you could do that is send 2 people that you trust, go there, come back and report. Tell me what's going on in the Jewish communities. So when Rab Ami and Rab Asi, of course, accept this mission, when they arrived in one of the towns, they asked to be shown the city guardians. So the locals showed these two students. They showed them the security apparatus that they had. They showed them the soldiers and the police and everybody else. So Rab Ami and Rab Asi exclaim, "Are these the guardians of the city? These people are the destroyers of the city." This was their reaction. They explained that the true guardians of the city, who are the true guardians of the city? I'll give you a minute to think. Who do you think the true guardians of the city are? And they told them the true guardians of the city are the school teachers who teach the children Torah. They are the ones who guard the city. Now, this is a very, very fascinating story for a number of reasons. The Medrash is part of the oral Torah. And as such, the Medrash is not a story book. The job of the Medrash is not to give us, bedtime stories or nice material for a class. That's not what the job of the Midrash is. The job of the Midrash is to be a source of directive for every single Jew, to teach us how we are supposed to live as a Jew, how we are supposed to conduct ourselves as Jews. So this instruction of Rab Ami and Rab Asi is an instruction both on a very personal level as well as on a communal level. Chassidus has a saying that says, a person is a miniature world. So whatever message there is for the global community at large, that same message is there for the individual in his personal world, my own world that I live in. So when one considers what it takes to maintain a city, our initial thought goes to, if you want to have a stable city, you have to have safety and security. You have to have a proper law enforcement. That's the way every sane person's mind travels. Basic necessity is you have to have a way, you have to have some type of a police force, some type of safety net for everybody. But the Torah teaches us that those people that we would think are the security are actually not the ones who are providing the city with security. They are not the guardians of the city. It may very well be that they are the ones destroying the city. That's a very radical statement to make. But the true guardians of the city are the teachers, the ones that teach Torah to the children. Now you have to understand, when Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi went to visit the city, they didn't go and interview some non-Jews or some very, very secular Jews, and that's who they went out for lunch with, to see what was going on in the Jewish community. Presumably, they went and they met with the spiritual leaders. They met with the rabbis. They met with those who were in charge of the spiritual welfare of the community, among other things. So when they asked, and they were shown the Neturei Karta, the guardians of the city, the police and the army, it was the rabbis who were showing them. Obviously the rabbis that were living in those cities, they felt that these were the guardians of the city. It's not a crazy thing to think that the police force are the ones that keep the city in check. That's a very normal thing to say. It was the students of Rebbe, of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, a leader who rebuilt the Jewish people in the land of Israel. It was they who taught the rabbis an important lesson. So what exactly did they mean? What exactly was their intention? What was their point that they were trying to make and to stress? So let's back up for a second. And this is not to suggest, and I say this because I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea that the Rebbe, Ami, and Rabbi Asi, or anyone else, any other rabbi, is of the opinion that we should defund the police totally. That's not the idea. It's not the idea. In other words, I opened up with saying that there's a mitzvah in the Torah, you have to have a police force. You have to have an army. So we have to weigh, we have to understand, what does it mean? On the one hand, we know that there's a mitzvah to have this type of a security apparatus. On the other hand, you're telling me that these people are not the true guardians, but it's the teachers who are the guardians. So how do we understand? And obviously it's not a contradiction. As well as we know that as Jews, one of the very important principles of our religion is that we are not to rely on miracles. We have to take care of matters in ways that human beings do things. God gave us a mitzvah in the Torah. We read it a few weeks ago. We have to guard your lives very, very well, which means we have to use natural means, and you cannot rely on supernatural assistance. You can't sit back and say that I'm going to have money fall from the sky. You got to go get a job. You can't say that I'm sick and I'm unwell, and the doctor prescribes a medicine for me, but you're going to say, but I'm not going to the doctor because God is going to make me better on his own. That's relying on supernatural assistance. We can't rely on supernatural assistance. We have to take matters in a natural means. And this is a message for the Jewish people. Even a Jew who's a rabbi, even a Jew who is observing Torah mitzvahs, such a person may think that the true guardians of the city are those that are hired to do the job, those that have the guns, and those that have the weapons, and those that have the uniforms and the badges and the handcuffs. They're the ones that are, if you're telling me we have to live in natural means, naturally speaking, who are the people that guard the city? 1 + 1 = 2 is the law enforcement. That makes perfect sense. So now Rab Ami and Rab Asi come along and they say, despite what you think, despite who you think are the people that are the guardians of the city, we're going to give you a different perspective. We're going to teach you something that you didn't realize up until this point. And the same thing is when it comes to our small city. Again, our small city refers to my personal world, me. According to the code of Jewish law, every single person, a Jew, has to eat in a healthy manner, and you have to drink in a healthy manner. You cannot harm your body in any way, shape, or form. We have no permission to harm our bodies. We have to treat our bodies delicately, and we have to return our bodies back to God in the best condition that we are able to return it. We are forbidden from self-inflicting pain. And we are required to maintain a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle, one that preserves the health of the body. So if I were to ask me a question and you a question, a normal person, if this is the model of Judaism, health takes precedence. So I'm going to ask you now that question. Who is the guardian of your city, your miniature city, your body, your Jewish body that you must take care of? Who are the people? What are the things that maintain that health in your body? So most likely you're going to rely on healthy food, proper hydration. That's what maintains a healthy body. So the guardians for good health are eating properly, sleeping properly, drinking properly, breathing properly. And that's the recipe for a healthy body. That's how a Torah scholar would have thought to give that answer for the guardian of the city. Comes along Rav Ami and Rav Asi, and they say that's a very, very superficial and perhaps misguided way of thinking. Because yes, while it is true that the Torah commands us to guard our lives well, and we have to be particularly careful to protect our health through natural means. We cannot rely on the supernatural. That's not the way of the Jewish people. We have to also ensure something very important, and that is our minds. Our mind in the miniature body. And when we're asked, who are the guardians of our city? We have to think beyond the food, the drink, the sleep as the law enforcement and law and order. And we have to remember that our mind, our brain, plays the central role. If you only think that the food and the drink are the guardians of my little city, then actually the food and the drink become the destroyers of the city. And that's the fascinating next step that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi teach. What you think, who you think are the guardians of your cities, are actually the people who are destroying your city. Why? Because you fail to realize who the true guardians are. So by propping up false guardians, this mistake is actually so hurtful to yourself that it's actually destroying your own city. And now let's take it to a level out. If a person believes that the existence of their community or city is guaranteed by the police force keeping order on the streets and in the city in general, and think of other matters necessary to maintain the city as secondary, this approach leads to destruction. So now we'll stop over here and think for a moment, and I'd like you to think for yourself. If you have a city of people who are educated people, who go to school and who are taught proper ethics and the proper way of living, versus a city where you have no education, no morals being taught, but a massive police force in the city, and you had to go for a stroll at night by yourself at 2 a.m. through one of these cities, which one would you choose? Would you rather walk through the city of people who are educated, have morals and ethics, were raised in a proper family life, but they have very, very few police? Or would you rather walk through a place where nobody went to school, there were no proper teachers, no proper parenting, but a large police force? Obviously, most people, a healthy person, when given this choice, would choose the former. Because we're all aware that the first step, the real guardian, the most important people to create a healthy civilization are the teachers and the education. They are so much more important than the police force when establishing a city. And they are so much more important than the police force or the law enforcement when it comes to placing value on one versus the other. The value of the education system, the value of a teacher, the value of someone who is imparting knowledge and ethics to a student, to a child, to an ignoramus is so much more valuable, so much more important, should be propped up so much higher than someone who stands with a stick and a gun and a badge and is able to arrest you and to lock you up in jail. It's not that we don't have and place value on a police force. It's a mitzvah to have a police. It's a mitzvah to have judges. It's a mitzvah to have an army. But that's only for the small minority of people, for the small cases, that there's always going to be some crime. There's always going to be a need for a little bit of law enforcement. Fine, we accept that. But the true heroes, the people who are really raising a healthy generation, the people that are most responsible for the safety and the security of the city, they are the teachers. And if we have this in reverse, chas v'shalom, if God forbid we get confused and we think for a moment that the law enforcement is more important in creating a healthy civilization than the education department, you should know that the law enforcement department, instead of becoming the guardians of the city, actually become the destroyers of that same city. Because we are raising a generation of people that have misplaced values. And if the next generation sees where the previous generation has misplaced values, that's where they go to, and you create a massive, unhealthy space for people to live in, where people think that the police are the enemy, people think that the police are just out to get me, people think all types of things about the police, and really all the police want to do is, I want to go to work and come home to my family at night and have absolutely not one call and let me do whatever I do. We won't stereotype right now, but whatever any officer wants to do. Nobody is looking, for the most part, nobody is looking for trouble. So this is where we have to steer our efforts. This is where we have to steer our resources. This is how we have to allocate in terms of when setting up a budget. We're talking about a city budget, a neighborhood budget, a community budget. It's all based on allocating a certain amount of limited funds. We have to establish, based on that, you can see, based on where the government allocates funds, you can see and determine what is a priority, where the people in charge think, where their brains are at, in terms of having a healthy city, a healthy state, a healthy neighborhood, a healthy country. So if we want the police force and we want the security officers to successfully do their job of keeping enemies out of the city and allowing friends in, we need to ensure that there is a school for young students and a yeshiva, a high school for older students, that's staffed with teachers who teach Torah and Mishnah and Talmud and practical Jewish law, said Rab Ami and Rabasi. These are the people that are guarding the city. These are the Neturei Karta, the true guardians of the city. And similarly, if you want your food and your drink to be beneficial for the body in the physical sense, you need to start your day with davening, with Torah study, with observing Jewish laws and guidelines for how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, and to observe the Jewish laws of business practice. And this ensures that my eating and my drinking and my exercising and all the other things that I'm doing is not done in a gluttonous, disgusting way that would really destroy the body. Because think about it. How many people are suffering today? How many people suffer today from some type of eating disorder? So that same food, which can be the healthy guardian, which people look at as the God of all of health and maintaining everything, becomes the enemy. So many people struggle. So many people have such difficulties and so many different types of disorders when it comes to this. And this is true that in order to guarantee the laws of the city won't be like Sodom and Gomorrah, Evil conduct needs to be eradicated. For this, we have to set up city guardians who operate the educational system based on sacred values. It's all about values and ethics. And from a Jewish perspective, values and ethics are found inside the Torah. It's in the Chumash, it's in the Mishnah, it's in the Gemara, it's in the code of Jewish law. That's where you have these sacred values. These city guardians teach the leaders of the city and the law enforcement included how to properly behave, who to be suspicious of, who to welcome in, etc., etc. And this makes a city worthy of divine protection. And there's another interesting idea here as well. Because you know that historically speaking, it was Greece, the Greeks, they made the body, they worshiped the body. With the Olympics, it was all about worshiping the body and the temple and muscle, and the life was all about the fascination of the human body, the physique of a person, of a human being. And one can mistakenly think, hey, if you look, Jews we're required to eat healthy and take care of our bodies. Isn't this a very similar idea? They worship the body, and in many ways we also worship the body. But there's a critical differentiation over here that makes the world of a difference. And that is, of course, that where they thought as the body was the temple and the end, and therefore it has to be glorified, we don't look at it that way. The body is merely the vehicle for the soul. The body is created in the image of Hashem, and therefore the body itself has some spiritual value to it. It itself is spiritual. It's the only creation which was created in the image of God Almighty Himself, as well as it becomes the vehicle that houses my soul, which is a fragment of God. And because of that, I have to respect my body more than anything else. I have to treat it so delicately to return that body which was given to me, not as an article that I own, not as one of my possessions, but it was lent to me. It was given to me on deposit to return back after 120 years. I have to treat that with the respect that it deserves. Our focus is on the spiritual, on the soul. It just happens to be that the body is what holds the soul, which changes the perspective completely, gives us a whole new outlook, which is why one of the Chabad Rebbes would say that a small hole in the body is like a big hole in the soul. Because you know very simply, if you're sick and you're not feeling well, due to whatever illness you have, you cannot observe and serve God properly. You have no koyach. You can't walk, you can't talk, you can't move. You have all different types of disorders, whatever it is. They get in the way, they become distractions, and they become obstacles in the way of, and sometimes really impediments and total blockages in the way of me serving Hashem. So if we're not careful with our own health, so we think, what's the big deal? It's only a small little thing. Who cares? A small hole in the body. No. That small hole in the body may end up actually being a very large hole and gap in the soul. The soul is not going to be able to express itself properly because you didn't maintain your body the way you should have and the way you could have. So we have to be very careful with this, but it's all soul-based. It's never, God forbid, about the body itself as some type of physique to worship, God forbid, as the old Greeks did. And we see this, a very interesting story. It's a very interesting story. As I said, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rebbe, was very good friends with Antoninus. As part of his friendship, there's related a number of stories that happened with them. And there's one fascinating story that I'll share with you. It's a very simple story, but I think it's one that we can all relate to and understand in a very, very real way. Rebbe once invited Antoninus to his house for Shabbos, for a Shabbos meal. He invited a non-Jewish emperor, the big macher, the president of the United States, coming to the rabbi's house, to the chief rabbi's house for a Shabbos meal. Okay, beautiful. And as I said before, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a very, very wealthy person. In his home, he had all of the delicacies possible that were kosher at the time, things that no one else, that he had to travel to the other end of the world to get. He had it at his table, on his Shabbos table. So when he heard the emperor, when Antoninus accepted the invitation, so he prepared everything before Shabbos. And because, of course, on Shabbos, you're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to have, you're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos, right? So the food that he served on Shabbos was cold. It must have been lunch. It was cold. It wasn't hot. Not like today, you have ovens with Shabbos modes, different types of things. They didn't have that. It was cold. Food was great, but it was cold. And Antoninus, this non-Jew Antoninus, obviously was used to, this wasn't his way of eating. He never ate the cold food before. That goes without saying. But he ate the food and it did not bother him at all. He found the food to be very tasty and delicious. He was very fond of the meal that he had in Rebbe's house. Time went by, a few months, however long it was, story doesn't say. And Rebbe invited Antoninus again to his home. But this time it wasn't for a Shabbos meal. This time it was for a regular weekday meal. A lunch, a dinner, whatever it was. Come over, let's have dinner together. And this time Rebbe served him again delicious food. But this time he served him hot food. It wasn't Shabbos. So he was able to prepare and serve it in the most beautiful way possible. Antoninus eats the hot food and he turns to Rebbe and he says as follows: the food I ate last time tasted even better, even though it was cold. So Rebbe turns to him and says, you're right. And the reason is because the food that we're eating today is missing a spice. So Antoninus got very angry. He said, does the Caesar lack any spice in his kitchen? Do I lack any ingredient in my kitchen? Why didn't you ask me to bring that spice? He got all angry at Rebbe. Where are you missing the spice? We're friends. Tell me to bring it. You can only imagine if you had a close friend like that. So Rebbe replies to Antoninus and he said, you couldn't bring me that spice because the spice is called Shabbos. Shabbos, the Caesar yelled. I never heard of such a spice. What spice is Shabbos? Teach me. So, of course, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi explained to Antoninus, his non-Jewish friend, the emperor of Rome. He explained to him that the meal was a Shabbos meal, and the special atmosphere and the special love and the spirit of Shabbos gives the food an entirely different taste. Today is a weekday, he told him, and the food tastes normal. It's normal food today. Last time it was Shabbos food, and this time it's normal food. So let's understand this. The Caesar asks, because it's lacking some taste, and Rebbe answers him, you're right. It's lacking taste because it's not Shabbos, so the food has a different taste. Why? Because the holiness of Shabbos itself changes the taste of the food. The spiritual affects the physical. This is the way it works with food for Shabbos. But it's the same concept that we're talking about over here. If our eyes are focused on the physical, and we think that it's the police and the army and the food that maintains the safety, security, and our good health, we've got it all wrong. There's something spiritual. There's a mind aspect. There's values. There are ethics that are sacred and holy. They are the true preservers of a holy and sacred civilization. If you divorce a people from these sacred values, you're going to be left with chaos, ruin, and destruction. So you're going to fund and pump more money into law enforcement to try to stop these people who are unethical, these people who have no moral values, it's not going to work. Because that's not the antidote. The antidote is not to have more police and think that that's going to solve the problem. You have to have better education and that's going to solve the problem. You have to have more healthy family life and that's going to solve the problem. You have to have people who impart values and ethics to people, and that's going to be a solution to the problem. Of course, we have to have the law enforcement too, but that's only a band-aid. It's not going to really put the problem to bed. So to wrap it all up, even in 2023, when the conversation is had about funding the police or defunding the police, and we want to talk about from a Jewish perspective over here. So I don't think that the Jewish perspective is to defund the police, because you have to have a police force. But I do think that the Jewish perspective most certainly is that the biggest chunk of government money should be going to education. The biggest chunk of private charity money should be going to education. Because education is the future and the present together. It provides me and you today with safety and security, as well as another generation of safety and security. Absent education, absent Torah values, we are not going to have a Jewish people. And we saw this historically after the destruction of the first temple. When the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, and they took all of the rabbis and all of the teachers to exile in Babylonia, and they left Jews in Israel without teachers and rabbis and educators. When Ezra came back merely 70 years later, 70 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, he came back. And the Jewish community in Israel was nothing. They were completely assimilated. They were uneducated. They were clueless. They didn't know what it means to be a Jew. Ezra had to come, and that's why we call Ezra the second Moses, because Ezra retaught Judaism and replanted Judaism and rebuilt Judaism in Israel. It only took 70 years. That's a generation and a half, 2 generations of people. 2 generations go by, and it's finished, kaput, zero. Without educators, without rabbis. That's where it goes. So this is where our focus has to be as people, as Jews. This is where we need to focus on. We can't get caught up in the politics of these things. We have to look at everything from a Torah perspective. What does Torah have to say? Torah says you need teachers and you need police. You need judges and you need an army. You need to have rabbis. You need to have role models for people. When it comes to safety and security, you need all of the above. Number one is, who are the true people to guard the city? They are the teachers. They are the educators. For myself personally, zooming in now on me, in my ear koton, zahaguf, in my small city, this is my own body. What's my protector? What keeps me in line? What keeps me healthy? What keeps me healthy is a davening in the morning. What keeps me healthy is doing business the proper way according to Jewish law. No cheating, no stealing, no lying. These are the things that keep me physically healthy, because the Shabbos spirit makes the food taste better. Doing things properly, spiritually, has a profound impact on the physical well-being as well, whether it be my mental, whether it be my emotional, whether it be my food, whether it be my business environment. All are affected by my own way of life, my spiritual way of life, my observant way of life, my connection with my neshama, with my soul, my life being given to me by Almighty God, me recognizing that Almighty God gave me life, and me trying to follow His word and His instruction to the best of my ability. This is the way of Jewish life. This is the way of Jewish continuity. This is the way, the best recipe for safety and security in everyone's life and in everyone's city. Anyone have any questions?